Guys, this is a video I've been wanting to make for a while. I'm kind of apologize for being a little late, but pretty much last season, these are the baits that I feel caught me the most and the biggest fish throughout the entire season. Now, there's some stuff I'm trying this year that I didn't even start to use, or I used later in the year. Last year, like all the Ned rig stuff, I hadn't even really messed with that. I got all that done pretty much with just the shaky head worm. You know, it's kind of like my last resort. Nothing's biting. Throw that, slow down. But I want to go through also real quick and kind of explain how I hit a body of water. Now, it's still, the water hasn't warmed up enough yet to really hit it like what I'm going to describe here, because in the winter, and when the water is below 55 degrees, and of course during spawning season, you know, there's all kinds of things come into factor. But in general, if you're going to hit a body of water you're not familiar with, like if you know they're not, if you know they're hitting on, say, a jerkbait, or you went there last week and caught them on this or that, then yeah, you probably want to start with that again. But what I generally do, I use the faster moving stuff first, and I start from the top of the water column. So when I first show up, of course, it's the funnest way for me to fish. If you enjoy something more than the other, maybe that's what you should start with. But I would suggest start with a very fast moving topwater bait. Buzzbaits is the fastest thing out there. Throw it out there and just buzz it. You can go however fast or slow you want, and try to start kind of fast. I start kind of medium, and just see if I'm getting bites. If I don't get anything, I'll go as slow as I can to keep that blade, creating the bubbles. And I've got even a video out about buzzbaits. But I tend to, as a dark, if I get there and it's still dark, black, it doesn't really matter, but I start with black. But if the sun's starting to come out, I like white or white and chartreuse more than black. I feel like I catch more fish than I do with the black one. But when it's dark, for some reason, these tend to not work as well as the black one. But then if they're not hitting on this, or the bite seems real slow, and my favorite topwater period would be this guy. And that, it's just a popper, but it is Megabass's popper. It's got the little holes cut in it, and you can tell this one's beat up. I've caught probably more fish on this thing than any other bait, but I do like topwater, and I like this bait. That's the color I like. It varies a little bit. You've heard me talk about it before. That's really it here in this one. Those, it's the closest I found it in their other baits. That color really works. Now, for some reason though, I feel the white. This is the next size down. This is a Pop Max. This is the Pop X, I think they just call it. It's the next size down. That's their crackle white one or whatever. This thing has caught me bigger bass for some reason also, and it sometimes will catch the numbers. And then this little guy, this is a baby Pop X or something it's called for Megabass. I've caught like a 5-pound bass on that. That is a very little, I don't know the exact weight, very small. But then anytime that you're throwing, these work real well out in open water, just like a popper. And actually, I walk the dog. I generally don't. Most of my bass come from learning how to walk the dog with these things. Kind of popping them sometimes, but most of the time when it's if you don't know about walking the dog, Google that, figure that out. Maybe put a video on that. How I don't know. It's not really something you can kind of tell people, but they just have to learn the rhythm for themselves. But kind of like jerkbait fishing. If it's still early, or I'm thinking topwater's working, but anytime you're in gunk and lily pads and mossy and nasty stuff to where every time you throw this out, or you're afraid that's going to get stuck in a tree or they get hung up, throw a frog. And I've got a couple with the pointed nose, but this is a popping one. I've got a video out on this one too. Booyah pad crasher, popping pad crasher they call this one, I believe. But I'm not sure if the colors even make a huge difference when it comes to frog fishing, because you're usually in so much muck when you want to use one of these that the disturbance is what they're looking and seeing and hearing. I don't know if they can make out much of the thing. I think these have a little bit of factor in it. But once they just realize there's something right there they want, and they'll whack that. But I've caught a lot of nicer bass on that, throwing it in spots where I wouldn't even think to throw anything else because it would be hung up. So if you don't like frog fishing, at least get you a couple. You want to throw it on stouter gear. But that's pretty much your top water column. Surface lures. There's a whole bunch of others. I threw a whole bunch of others, but I feel that those guys there help catch me a lot of more numbers, and of quality big size bass. Numbers strictly, this is a bait that's hard to beat. It's just a little Dig It from Cabela's. This is their newer color. If you go getting them and ordering them, that's the new version. I'm not sure if the bills are any stronger. That's the only downfall to these. Of course, they're square bills. They're made to be bounced off stuff, but you will be breaking some of these. They're only like $3.99 though. That's their old color. And I don't know, I've showed people my box. I've got like 15 of these little guys. I want to always have one of these, because if you don't know familiar with square bills, they can be pretty much, and this little guy will do it. If you get it out past a stump, a piece of brush, whatever, in the water and start working it, it comes right through that. Now if you get a tree facing this way, you know, and you're trying to go through the branches, maybe not as well, but it's the best square bill I've seen for nasty stuff that can be pulled through, and it'll run right alongside a branch for like, I've ran one like 4 foot alongside a branch and it didn't stick to it, you know, as long as it's in the water. Like any bait, you throw it out and the first thing it hits is the brush or a twig or stick. A lot of times them trebles just stick to it, and then you got to go get it or whatever. But these are one that bass, you feel they're hitting, you know, maybe not quite surface, but closer to the bank. 2, 4, 6 foot deep. These only go 6 foot if you work them right. If it's kind of mucked up, like these don't go at all through for grass and any kind of stuff other than, say, rocks or brush. You know, these will kind of, if you slow bounce them off rocks, work okay too. But if you get to that nasty gunky stuff, like you would use a frog for topwater, but somewhere below the surface there's nasty stuff, that's when I suggest, well, you could use spinnerbaits. They work sort of. I feel I get more feel. I don't know if you've ever fished with chatterbaits. Most of you probably have. I like them for the blade and the noise it makes, or the feel you get from that blade. So you can kind of, once you get the feel of it, how just reel them just slow enough to be scraping across whatever gunk is under the surface, whether it's in, usually these only work anywhere from, you know, 1 foot to 3 foot deep maybe. Usually after 3 or 4 feet, I like something else. You know, deeper water tends to work better than these chatterbaits. Spinnerbaits, real slow road, maybe a little better. But the colors I use on these, I want to talk about real quick. When it's the, you know, you feel like the fish aren't, I don't know, not, I guess, color shy, and it's real dark, muddy water, whatever. Chartreuse and white's hard to beat. There's just times as the water clears up, and when it's real clear, this is my favorite color. I don't know if you guys can make that out. And it's just basically like black, brown, and then it lightens up to maybe a lighter brown to almost yellowish skirt. And then when it's real, you know, clear water, I use, that's Reaction Innovations Sweet Beaver. I think that's called Donkey Punch or something. That color seems to work. But if it's kind of mid, like it's not really, and this is actually the skirt that came with the, and I always use Z-Man, the original chatterbaits. That's the ones I like best. And that's their original skirt. And you tell it's a little bit brighter than that one. See how that's just a little bit brighter? So as it's starting to get dirty, not muddy water, and you still see maybe a foot or two down, anything darker, go to that. But it's just not real clear. I like to use, and that's the Z-Man, I forget what the name of that trailer, but you can't miss that orange, and it's on the bottom, and it's more of a brown on top. But that color seems to be better in that, just, you know, slightly stained, not perfectly clear water, real clear water. Almost the same thing, black-headed half-ounce, but that's, I don't remember the brand. It's an aftermarket skirt. It's a little bit darker colored than the original Z-Man one, and the Donkey Punch seems to help me there. And then I'm not big on big spinnerbaits for whatever reason. I've kind of went away. I mean, I don't know. I think I've kind of switched out my spinnerbait fishing for chatterbait fishing. But occasionally, and there's times when these white spinnerbait, for whatever reason, I don't care what the blade is, sometimes just a white spinnerbait is what they are whacking. And last year I found that this little bitty one is what I'd several times, not just one trip out, but several different trips, I would get onto a little bite and catch 5 or 10 when these others, you know, weren't hitting as well. But so I'd suggest having some sort of white spinnerbait, whether, you know, if you like throwing heavier stuff, lighter stuff, you know, if you don't want to do the chatterbait thing like I'm talking about, slow rolling across the muck and junk, then maybe you need a half ounce. So I've got a few of those, you know, spinner baits that you can roll a little bit slower. You want the blade just turning and grazing off the bottom with those. But then before I go to the bottom stuff, if you're just kind of, you know, the fish, like that's where these work. Real clear water, whether it be suspended fish or, you know, they're just not up on the banks. They're not on the bottom either. Jerkbait is a real good choice. If you see in this video I got coming out that I was whacking them on it. Not real big ones, but a lot of them. And then this is a good search one also. When you catch them on these rattle traps, you know, lipless crankbaits, whatever you want to call them, this is my favorite overall color. And you know, you can see this one's chewed up. I had it a few years now. It's caught a bunch of fish. But last year it got a workout. There was times I just throw that out, and there's different ways. There's kind of a yo-yo retrieve. There's all different ways to actually fish these things. I actually just throwing them out in deep water sometimes, letting them hit all the way off the bottom, and then just kind of pull up and then reel back to it, and pull up and reel back to it, is a very sometimes can be a deadly way to catch them. And jerkbait fishing, you guys have seen, it's just that stuff will wear you out. I fished yesterday and I about wore my left arm out jerking that thing around. Then this is a bait. This is probably the most versatile as far as it'll work all over. Now these are the Z-Man, so I use it with a little bit. That's a 1/16 ounce head. Otherwise these things will just float with a regular hook. They won't even sink. But I want it, and you can change up the. Some people, you know, this is Cinco, wacky rig it, whatever, basic fishing style. But I found I like the sink rate of this thing. You know, if they're up hitting up top, even though it's going to sink, when it first hits the water, it goes slow. They'll whack it usually if they're hitting top water still. And that's another good thing. Sometimes fish will come around. I'll talk about this real quick. You may start with these topwater baits and never have a fish. The first, you know, 20 minutes, half hour, and you're like, oh, I'll have to go something else. But if you start throwing these guys, the ones that float or the ones that take a little while before they start sinking, but fish start hitting them instantly. You know, it could be you've already fished 3 or 4 hours and you're catching some fish. There's always a time when a topwater bite will turn on. So if you're throwing something in the water and as soon as it's hitting the water, you're getting a hit, I would go back to a topwater if you're not throwing a topwater. Because that more than likely is, for whatever reason, the bites come back on for the topwater bite. Just something to think about. But I don't know how many times this will happen. I'll start fishing with those and, you know, as soon as it hits the water, maybe not even a crank, bam, they're hitting. I'm like, okay, so I'll go back to, you know, maybe this guy or this guy and close to that color, you know, and then just kind of work a, you know, and then if they start hitting that, it's the funnest fishing I think there is, topwater. So always keep that in mind. But then when you're doing all this moving stuff and all these seem to, whatever reason, you're just like, man, fish, they're not biting too well today. Because that's how I've worked my way down my progression. And this guy, you could throw it anytime. You could throw this from the morning, throw it weightless, you know, just get a hook, rig it wacky style. You can get a hook, rig it Texas style. Just throw it out there and let it slowly sink. But it's so slow is why, unless it's like a finesse presentation, same thing with this guy. But it'll go from the top all the way down. You could rig it wacky style with a 1/2 ounce weight and just, you know, let it, and then get it on bottom and then just kind of plop it around on bottom. You could basically do a drop shot, you know, to where you've got the weight, you know, 12, 14, 18 inches below it, and just on a hook, just shaking it off the bottom. You know, this bait right here works real good for any situation. What I use it for is when this stuff hasn't really seemed to be working, I'll go to this and the shaky head and see if one or the other will get me more bites. Now somewhere in between that, this is also just a jig. And I hadn't really started using what I called a Ned rig jig yet. And this was more of a swim jig. I've got the, I can't even think it, Kitech Crazy Crawl. I'm not sure the exact name, but Kitech, and it's got crazy scented like squid or something. But when I went to this, it's a, I believe, I want to say that is a Booyah jig head. And it's just because I wanted the lightest I could find. There's not too many out available, especially like around here, Cabela's, Bass Pro, or Rogers. And I believe that's an 1/8 ounce maybe. But that is a Z-Man finesse skirt. I wanted that color. And the closest thing, originally when I ordered it, I just wanted to give Kitech a try, but the colors are almost perfectly match. And this little jig going, not so much as swimming it, but kind of just keeping it off the bottom, just keeping it slowly moving. And I added these rattles too, kind of make it, you know, gives it arms or whatever. But that little thing works real well. But when all this other stuff, and I mean, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't even get a hit today. It's usually hotter summertime, you know, or when it's real cold. Just throw, and I suggest whatever finesse, you know, whether it be a 7-inch, some guys even say a 4-inch, you know, a little shaky headworm. You want it to float, and so jig head's going to be on bottom, and I don't even know where the tail is or the head. I think that's the head, but so it's just kind of, you're just shaking it around on bottom, working it slow. And I'd suggest, you know, doing that, just throwing it out, counting it down. That's a good idea to know, you know, how long it's going to take for that to go down. So when you got clear water, a lot of times just, you know, get a judge of how quick this thing sinks with a 1/16, 1/8 ounce, whatever, you know, when you hit the bottom, and then just, you know, work it slow where you think there's bass. But I caught a lot of big bass on this color, and then I'll talk about colors real quick on pretty much my worms. I like natural colors most of the time, but if you're dropping something in the water and say a foot of water, between a foot or 2 foot, you can kind of see it, go with natural colors. Houdini, baby bass, just watermelon, green pumpkin. When that water gets so nasty that within 2 foot you lose sight of it, you know, you're dropping it down beside the boat and you're like, wow, that, you know, basically, yeah, the wow. If you're like, wow, that's pretty, you know, dirty. I go on this color, something bright, almost the brightest you can. I've got some of these that are chartreuse with a dark green. This thing, I don't really have much luck with white worms, but this thing works pretty good for that. But you know, just kind of judge. They've also got one called a bubble gum that you can catch fish on. Okay, well, hope I didn't confuse you. Hope that helped. I've been wanting to put this out for a while now, but hopefully that'll give you an idea of kind of what I went through last year. It's going to be almost the same in how I hit a body of water start to finish in a day's time. And if I do go out late, I usually still want to start with something that moves fairly quick. Maybe I'll skip the top one. Maybe I'll jump right to this guy. This guy's a good one. If you just show up someplace, start throwing. If they start hitting it as soon as it hits the water, go back up. You know, whoa, stop what you're doing. Go back up to topwater bait. If you're not getting any hits, or you feel like as it bottoms out and gets almost to the boat, maybe something's tapping at it, then throw something out that'll go even deeper and a little slower. Try that out. But anyway, thanks for